Why is it that these two sounds here look different and yet they sound the exact same? Why is it that when I take this sound here and I pitch it down an octave, it sounds different than when I pitch it down an octave here? These are some of beatmaking's greatest mysteries. For centuries, some of our greatest minds have been trying to uncover what's really happening here. Well, today I've solved these mysteries, and what I've found will shock you. Us beatmakers have been told a lie, and there's a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels, and that's exactly what I'll uncover in today's Beatmaking Mysteries. Now this is something that would always confuse me. It kind of didn't make sense how stretching worked. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we take this 808 right here. This is how it sounds naturally, but let's say we went ahead and stretched this sound out. At this point it sounds lower in pitch, and that makes sense. That's how waveforms work. If you have one sound whose waveform fluctuates more frequently, it's a higher frequency sound. And if you have a sound that fluctuates at a lower frequency, like my stretched out 808, it's lower in frequency. And that's why when we stretch our waveform, it shifts our sound into a lower frequency space. But here is where things start to get confusing. Let's start this process over again. But what I'm going to do instead here before I stretch it is change the stretch mode. And this is something that pretty much every DAW will let you do. Now when I stretch this sound out, its waveform still changes. Our waveform becomes lower in frequency just by looking at it again. And yet, when I play them, the sound doesn't change. Its pitch is the same. It has the exact same frequency. And this doesn't make sense. How is it that this sound's waveform looks completely different? It has a lower frequency, and yet the sounds have the same frequency. Well, this is it, people. This is the grand reveal. This is gonna blow your mind. Are you ready for this? It's because this isn't actually showing you the real waveform. This is how the waveform actually looks when we stretch. Kind of interesting, I guess. I don't know. I had a feeling this was happening, that our DAW isn't actually showing us the real waveform. To figure this out, what I did was I just printed out the stretched out version of the 808. Lo and behold, you can see the real waveform's frequency looks closer to our original unstretched 808, which is why they had the same pitch. For whatever reason, when you change the stretch mode, it chooses not to show you the actual waveform when you stretch. Not sure why it does this. Either way, now that I have uncovered this conspiracy, I wouldn't be surprised if the FBI arrested Mr. Loops himself, and he'll likely see his day in court for all of his lies and deception. But this actually made me wonder how stretching is even possible. It's kind of crazy that we're able to stretch a sound without changing the actual frequency of its waveform. So I looked it up, and it's actually pretty interesting how it works. What happens when you stretch a sound is it chops your sound into multiple smaller pieces. And then what it does is it takes each of these pieces and duplicates them out. After that, it tries to take these duplicated pieces and put them together in a way that feels seamless when we hear it. And as it does this for every single piece, what happens is our waveform ultimately gets extended when all of these pieces get combined together. And we also get to maintain a sound that has the same pitch because we aren't actually changing the frequency of the waveform. To get more technical, it uses various vehicular ramifications on the quadrilateral bifunctions to optimize the topography of your sound. Look, I know you're not smart enough to follow the genius things that I'm saying right now. The important thing to know here though is that not every stretching algorithm is created equal. For example, let's take that same 808 and stretch it out in two different ways. The first way, I will use Serato Sample, which is known for having one of the best stretching algorithms out there. And the second way, I'll use FL Studio stock basic stretching feature here, and then let's compare the two. So this is what Serato came up with. It looks and sounds very stable, very consistent, and close to the original sound, and this is what FL Studio came up with. Just a bit more inconsistent. At one point we have this section here where it sort of wobbles in and out. It just doesn't sound as good, so that's something that you should know about and be on the lookout for. The world of sample stretching is a dangerous one full of lies and deceit, so please be careful. Now before we move on to case number 2, let me know down below in the comments if you have a beat making mystery that you want me to solve. Is there something about beat making that's never quite made sense to you? Let me know. And while you're at it, hit the like button. Being a beat detective is hard work, and your likes help me pay for my family's food. Now on to case number 2. This is something that I've been curious about for a while. At times I would see other producers print out their patterns and repitch the printed version instead of just repitching it directly in the piano roll. So for example, here we have the sound. And when I pitch it down in the piano roll, it sounds different than if we printed the original sound out and we pitch this sound down. It's a cool sound design technique, but you might be curious why. Why do these two sound different? Well, the reason why this happens is because this piano here is a sample from a plugin. And many plugins will use samples instead of creating sounds from scratch, meaning the plugin makers will literally have someone sit in front of a piano and play every single key and at multiple different velocities as well. And this is why Omnisphere, for example, requires you to buy an entire server room just to install it. It's just full of tons and tons of sample recordings, and as you can imagine, this requires a lot of space. But the important thing to know here is that samples work differently than synthesized sounds. Let me show you what I mean. Here is the frequency readout of our piano sound. As you can see, we have this pattern where the lowest peak here is the loudest, and as we go up, the peaks become less and less loud. And this is where things get interesting. If I were to print the piano out and repitch it, take a look at the frequency readout of this sound. It follows this exact same pattern. The lowest peak is the loudest, and as we get higher and higher in frequency, the peaks get smaller and smaller. But take a look at what happens when I go back into my original sound and pitch it down an octave. We get an entirely different readout. The second peak now is the loudest. Our sound is just fundamentally sitting in a different space in a different way. And this is how instruments sound in real life. When you play the different keys on a piano, it isn't going to sound like you're just replicating one exact tone and moving it up and down in frequency with exact perfection. And this is also why printing a sound and repitching it almost gives it an unnatural feel. This isn't how instruments sound in real life when you play them at different pitches. And I want to say this by no means is a bad thing. It can make for a cool sound design trick that you can use in your beats. So now you know how and why this technique works. So those are two of beatmaking's greatest mysteries solved. I can finally sit back and know that I've made the world a better and safer place. Again, let me know down below if you have any cases for me to solve. If you've enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com to check out my full online beatmaking course. I also have a free drum kit to download in the description box below, as well as a link to my Discord if you want to hang out with my producer community. Anyways, I'll see you next time.